Hello and welcome to this webinar today. We are going to talk about how to build measurability into your commercial development initiatives for the next 45 minutes or so. And I hope to give you an introduction as to why is this actually important, and also provide some pragmatic tools on how to structure measurability to ensure impact and also to demonstrate ROI on your commercial development initiatives. Before we get too much into that, I would love to maybe take a moment to talk about why this is so important. Over the last years and so on, a commonality in commercial leadership is that organic growth is becoming more and more difficult to realize. So looking here at an example of one of our clients, looking over the last 3 years of development, their revenue has gone up pretty well and they're happy and everything is going right. But if we change the perspective a little bit and look at the corrected revenue, so looking at the real internal growth rate corrected for price increases and synthetic growth such as transactions, the image is a bit more bleak. I mean, we're still performing, we're still generating revenue increases and so on, but not at the rates that we want to. And that focus has changed quite a lot to focus on this real internal growth. So the resulting factors is that we see when we look at studies that there's an increased focus on how do we actually deliver this growth? How do we come about this? And I think it was McKinsey and Company that did a study where they isolated that almost 2/3 of sales leadership agree that organic growth and becoming better at unit sales and getting up market is super important in order to realize their potential. Also, we see that investments are going up, so there's more money being allocated to commercial development to get more efficiency and more effectivity out of your sales engine and trying to realize better growth rates. And of course, in most commercial excellence departments, this leads to an increase in initiatives. And more than half of commercial organizations just within the last year report that they have an increased amount of initiatives aimed specifically at generating organic growth. So all in all, we see that there is this increased focus and to deliver organic growth at higher rates. So why is this an issue then? So for example, when we see just one of the recent companies we looked at, so Nestlé, they actually are reporting on internal growth. So for example, that they were able to deliver an organic growth in a quarter of 1.4%, but if you correct for pricing alone, they actually have a negative real growth, and that is the focus that they have. So I think that all or almost all commercial leaders, they share that in their abilities to actually deliver this, they're getting squeezed, they're getting pressure to actually demonstrate ROI. All of the things we do, all of the trainings, all of the optimization efforts, where is the ROI? How can I see this down to my net operating profit? And that's a huge challenge, and that's why we're actually super interested in this topic and why we're going to talk about this in this webinar. So my name is Sixten Schultz. I'm a partner and consultant at the Quadrant Consultant in our commercial excellence practice. And for the last decade plus, I've been working with different areas of commercial development. And I, at least two, back before I joined Quadrant, I was working at another company where I had the responsibility to deliver some of these commercial growth. And I have felt that pressure, both in terms of making sure that it's deliverable and the attribution into the initiatives that we did, where actually then also realized, was it actually because we did this training or this initiative that we were able to deliver growth, and at what level? So what we're going to go through today is talk about the challenges of measurement. It is intrinsically hard to measure and at least also attribute and be in agreement in the leadership. What did this actually result in? And we're going to present an impact measurement framework. So how can we actually document the impact, both from what our initiatives, what we do, but also what's the effect and how does that translate into business results? There's also an important consideration to make about what is measurement and how detailed does it need to be. And this is where we're going to open up the discussion about what's correlation or what's causation, and how do we actually work with that to accommodate some of the challenges or discussions we might face. And then lastly, talk about like, how do we get started with this? What is the next steps, and how are we going to actually work with impact tracking and measurement in commercial initiatives? Just a short recap of what we do in Quadrant. Quadrant is a management consultancy that specializes in growth, and this is also why we hear this a lot talking to commercial leaders across industries. Both when we work, especially with developing, when we have strategies, but then when we work with transformations or optimizations efforts where we're trying to optimize the engine, this is really top of mind for a lot of executives, and especially when cost is a super focus. So within the transformation services, this is what we often meet, this pressure, and trying to help. How do we demonstrate this impact? So looking at what we're actually offering when we are helping to accelerate or transform businesses, it's everything from strategy to development efforts that we are working with, and also acceleration, so assisting companies with actually getting the ball rolling, whether that's an ABM programs or it's side-by-side outsourcing sales or an inside sales department. We support here as well. And in that realm, you could say, okay, so this is about performance measurement, and yes, it's correct. But it's also about how do we actually document the value of what we're doing within changing methodologies. If it's about generating playbooks, or it's about having the right training. What is the effect? How can we document that there is an impact of what we're doing? That's what we're going to deep dive in a bit today. So first of all, why do we need to measure in the first place? What is how do we measure the seemingly unmeasurable? So what's the revenue impact of a training, for example? How do we do that? And first of all, it's important to double click a little bit and say, okay, within this this realm of what we can do in commercial excellence, what is it that we actually do, and how do we measure that? Because not two initiatives are the same. So yeah, most commercial leaders are balancing a pretty wide portfolio of initiatives, or a playing field that is super wide, where we can actually do a lot of different natures. And just going to go through some of these. Commercial excellence managers or leaders are often tasked with doing sales optimization. So how can we increase the efficiency or effectiveness of our work? And this can be everything from optimizing the way we work to how we enable better conversations and so on. We're also typically tasked with some sort of customer engagement work. So how can we have more informed decisions about working with the customers? How do we make sure we have a feedback loop, and that we can actually deliver what is required to have a successful engagement? This can be everything from targeting to loyalty programs, and all of this that again is seemingly simple, but transferring that into the impact of segmenting in the right way needs to be documented. We're also working within market and product strategy. So how do we launch a product most effectively, and how do we get access to new markets, and all of that falls within that category. We are working with general operational efficiency, so looking at processes and automation, and how can we actually deliver insights and analytics? How can we automate our different kinds of work? And lastly, just in this categorization, partnerships can also be a source of work, where we need to develop programs and channel strategies. How do we evaluate the effectiveness of this? So across the board of all of these initiatives, at least what I see as a common challenge and a common theme about where we're challenged is the measures. So they share, or they have different measures as listed down here, but we also have a common challenge, I think. Most of these are not one set. It's not a binary, we did it or we didn't do it. It's mostly about dynamic changes. So what's the effectiveness over time? How did we actually do it? And in attributing, in building a partnership program, in building a segmentation engine, or building specific targeting, we need to make sure that there is a positive ROI. And attributing that change from development initiatives is intrinsically difficult. It's really something that everyone battles with and that they are challenged with. So in doing so, there's also another important factor, and that's the timing. So when we're doing a new segmentation, what's the time it takes to actually have some impact? And most often, across the board of what we're doing in commercial excellence of accelerating efficiencies and effectivity, the long-term impact is one of the difficult aspects. So if we do, let's say, a training, improvements, they can take years or months to materialize, especially if we have long sales cycles and so on. It's super difficult to attribute over to what's the long-term impact. And most of the time when we are talking to operations and looking at data, it's very few sales initiatives or sales training programs that are actually evaluated based on their long-term impact. We focus too much on the immediate effects and on measures that are super reactionary. So did you like it? What's the NPS score? Did this enable you to do X? There's also where we're looking at all of this attribution. Most of the time, it's not a super stable environment that we're working with. External factors are super impactful in terms of how did we succeed with our sales training or our sales performance. That can be impacted by macro factors. It can be impacted by consumer prices. It can be impacted by resource prices. So there's a lot of other factors that we need to take into account when we're actually looking at what is the impact. And then also another important factor in training is this knowledge retention. If you are building up new knowledge, new behaviors, and new training, how do you retain that information over time? Because when you're doing an initiative, the long tail and the effects might be super different from what you measure if you're measuring right after you've had a training. So all of that comprises a super challenging environment for measuring effectiveness. And it is also putting a lot of pressure about how do we actually do this? How should we measure? And especially when we're having the added complexity of working across geographies, across markets, across sales models, isolating the impact can be super difficult. So when we talk to sales leaders around Denmark and other countries, the main question they sit with is, okay, how do we actually measure them? What should we measure on? Because there's a lot of things we can do and cannot do, but how should we go about having this measurement? And at least for me, one of the things that is most important is not to look at commercial initiatives, whether it's training or process optimization or sales enablement, as a one-dimensional project, a one-dimensional deliverable. It is a change process, and many things need to actually be in place in order to have a correct and structured impact measurement. So, for example, if we're having a sales training, it's important to make sure that we know what's the goal of this training. If we are training in a certain value proposition, what do we want to achieve? It's also important to say, okay, how will we make that goal happen? If we want to say we need to add new sales of X percentage, what needs to be true in order for that to happen? What do we need in terms of change behavior? What do we need to actually support our sales organization or commercial organizations with? Also, we need to make sure that we document what's the leading indicators. What is it that will generate, for example, new meetings or new activities or improved conversion rates? What will we need to support in terms of knowledge or behavior? And also the last and most important point is, how do we enable this change? How do we build knowledge? How do we actually impact the behavior that we need in order to deliver the end-to-end impact? So at least for me, this is the head on the nail on why is measurement so super difficult. Many varieties of initiatives, are super difficult to isolate the impact, and also how do we attribute from A to C. A thing that we have done for a couple of our clients is to work with building an impact measurement framework. So how do we make sure we measure on the right things? I'll just tell you a little bit of a story that I've used in many meetings to illustrate why is it important that we measure and track on the right things, and not just look at purely reactional measures. So back in Delhi, I've used to work a bit also in India, and I had a great conversation with people in there, and they told me a story that back in the days where the British, they colonized India and came to Delhi, they experienced that they had some issues. The British officers, they were challenged or troubled with all of these snakes. There were cobras everywhere in the street. And they reported up and said, this is a hazard for our people. We need to do something about it. So what they agreed was that they made an incentive program. They started to tell everybody that for each snake that was, or cobra that was delivered into the parliament debt, you were able to trade that in for a prize, a couple of rupees, in order to incentivize the population of Delhi to actually help get away with the snake issue. And at face value, that seemed like a great idea. And initially, it also worked well. You saw more and more snakes getting delivered in, and there was reports of less and less snakes in the streets and so on. But the expectation was that over time, the amount of snakes would die out, and you would have eradicated the problem or kept it at a level that was acceptable. But that didn't really happen. The number of snakes, it started to slowly decline, but then all of a sudden it went back up. There was a surge in the amount of snakes that were delivered in a debt, and the government of Delhi, they were like, why is this happening? We can't really, there shouldn't be that many snakes. So they went out to figure out what was actually happening. And what happened was that they found out, the population of Delhi, that this could actually be not just a thing you could do on the side when you happen to meet a snake. This could be an actual source of income. The problem was we just didn't have enough snakes. So how do you go about that? How do you get more snakes? Instead of capturing them in the wild, maybe a good idea was to just start building snake nests and farming snakes in your basement. So that was actually what had happened, and many farms started to pop up, and it became a good source of income for a lot of people. But that kind of wasn't really what they wanted in the government, so they abandoned all of the programs. And then what happened? All of the snakes were set free, and the snake problem was higher than ever before. So we should make sure, or the reason why I tell this story is that the measure of how we measure our impact and where we focus our attention has a great impact of the results that we want to get, and we should avoid having perverse incentives in our measurement program and in our impact tracking. So I think it was Goodhart's law, or a guy from Britain, that in the parliament said that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And that's one of the things we need to avoid. And I think just to put into some perspective, one of the clients I've been working with have been super focused on getting more out of their inside sales department. So we needed to have more efficiency, we needed to generate more, we needed to do the right thing. So they set up a measurement report where one of the key measures that people were evaluated on was the number of meetings that they held. And that alone as a measure can be okay. It's an indicator that it's a means to a goal, but solely focusing on that parameter had some alternative effects. What happened was that instead of just having meetings of similar quality, you started to lag in the quality of meetings. You started just to have shorter meetings or disqualifying meetings because you just needed to hit your target. It was a lone measure that didn't really correlate to how we actually wanted to impact business, because the intent was not to have more activities and more meetings. The intent was to generate better business. So therefore, we need to be a bit careful about how we structure our programs. So how do we go about that? How do we structure this in the right way? And my main thesis is at least that we need to build a balanced structure. We need a broad perspective on impact to make sure that we can measure all the way from what we are training, or what are we changing, to what do we deliver of knowledge, to what is the outcomes that we want to go, and how does that link all the way up to net operating profit, which essentially is the goal that most sales leaders are pressured to deliver on. So, for example, in here, we need to figure out, by doing X, by having some sort of training, we build the ability to do Y, to do something new. Then by doing something new, the logic link is back leading up to an outcome, and that outcome is then linked up to getting an increase of sales, for example. So an example of that could be that we're looking at sales place where we could define a few areas where we have a pretty set play, where we need to do a certain set of actions in order to maximize our impact. So, for example, an activity could be that we need to develop sales plays and supporting tools for 3 specific must-win customer interactions, where we want to train them in that. That should hopefully help them structure and build the knowledge about what is the sequence that I need to go through, what is the conversations and value propositions I need to deliver, to whom and at what time. So we need them to do something different, and hopefully we can do that by that change activity. But what happens if we succeed with this? How do we actually deliver this behavior? It should hopefully have a logical link up to an outcome, or where we want to actually have an impact. So in this case, we want to enable the representatives to drive the right conversations, leading to an increase in our renewal rate. We have better conversations, more tailored to the customer, and also decrease the sales cycle, that by preempting having a desired outcome that is clearly defined, and having a flow up until that is super structured around that desired outcome, we can decrease the sales cycle, or the time spent to generate a sale. All good, that could be a measure, but then what is then the outcome of that? And this is one of the things, or the shortcomings we see most often, is that we shouldn't stop at the outcome, at the number of meetings or the sales cycle, but in order to suffice the pressure of management, we need to bridge it over to net operating profit. So if we, for example, succeed in delivering these increased win rates of, for example, 5%, and lowering the sales cycle by 8%, we can actually use that to calculate what is the effect. By doing that, we can increase the sales velocity, or the revenue generation, by 14%. So linking it all the way from A to C is super important. What I truly like about this framework is not necessarily the elements in it, but how it enables us to have more informed conversations, and how it with ourselves, and structure our programs in the right way to have this logical link. An example of that is that we actually are able to move both from the bottom up and from the top down. So, for example, moving from, let's say that we are starting with, we need some sales training, or we need some training in these initiatives. The important question is, okay, so why do we need that? Okay, we need that to build up this knowledge, or change this behavior. And then again, when we have that asked, why do we need to do that? We need that in order to be able to lower or shorten our sales cycles, or increase our conversions, or to generate more opportunities. Okay, and why do we need to do that? That would be a way to achieve the goal, in this case of increasing revenue. And the same goes the other way around. Independent of where you are, you can challenge the approach and what you're doing. So let's say you want to increase your revenue with X amount of percent. How do we do that? And there we need to have a strong logical link. There's typically a plethora of initiatives that you can do, but to isolate what is it that we actually believe that we can do by moving this pin, or focusing on this variable. And then say, okay, so if we want to focus this variable, let's say shorten the sales cycle, how do we actually do that? Challenge, what is the knowledge we want? What is the behavior change we want to inflict? How do we actually do that? Can we see that there is a logical link? Do we have an exhaustive list? And then also be sure to, okay, so how do we actually build that knowledge? How do we build the desired behavior that we're seeking to have? And typically that is through some sort of change activity. We need to enable our people in our front line to do something different. That can be typically via training, it can be via communication, it can be via different initiatives, but we need to understand and document how that links all together. So by having that discussion and having those links from what we are actually doing, what's the deliverable, what is the change that we want to do, and linking that up to the overall impact is how we should structure our measurement and how we should structure our cases in order to deliver the impact. So at least for me, when the first step of having this impact is to agreeing on what's the logical structure. So the logical structure we just talked about, and then it's about figuring out how do we actually issue this, what's the measurement points that we want to go through. So from the logical structure, we need to say, okay, how do we actually do this? How do we measure? And for the change activity, we have some ways of doing it. Typically, when we're doing, let's say again, a training, it's about some soft data. Did you gain the knowledge? Some self-reporting, some quizzes where we test were you able to do A, B, and C. This soft measures should, of course, also be coupled with some hard measures. So perform our participation rates. So if you're doing some training, if only 20% of people that participated, you can't really expect 100% to attain the knowledge. So making sure that we're looking a bit more granular on that level. In terms of knowledge and behavior, we need to figure out, did the individual actually get the knowledge? And a good way to do that is by tests. One of the pitfalls I see here a lot is that we assume that self-reporting is a good way to do that, where you're able to do X or do you feel capable of doing Y, and self-reporting just have an intrinsic bias because everybody knows that they're expected to do something, so there's a tendency to over-report. So here a good way of doing is by having like a simple form would be quizzes, tests how to evaluate the ability to do X, Y, Z, but you could also do scenario testing that is a bit more complex, but also gives you a better result. We also need to make sure that when we're measuring this, that it's rooted to some very distinct verifiable outcomes. So let's say we want to increase our conversion rate, that's the outcome we're looking for. We have the logical link that in order to do that, we need to use certain value propositions or send the follow-up emails. So what are the verifiable outcomes that we can see directly in our CRM system that we don't need anybody to evaluate on, but we can see from pure data? We also need to then, of course, focusing on the outcome. So that could be usage of tools and what did we deliver in terms of sales cycle and so on, and measuring it all the way up to businesses. In general, when we are looking across this board, there's an important aspect in terms of time. Being able to deliver some sort of indication of what is the ROI, and back to the issue with time and knowledge retention, is that we can't really answer all of these questions at the same time. So in general, what we see is that the change activity and where we are actually delivering training or some sort of onboarding or upskilling, that's where we can have a pretty good measure right away, so short-term measurement. Whereas if we want to report our impact based on revenue metrics or some of the more goal-oriented metrics, that's a long-term measurement. So we should not see this impact as being a one-off. It's a process where we need to work over a longer period of time in order to enable anybody to get anything useful out of it. I also think an important aspect is that we need to balance these soft measures, self-reported data and soft evaluations, these more qualitative measures, with hard measures. So going to strict numbers that you can't really question, because balancing the both makes sure that we get an ability to move fast, but also that we have a pretty that we're aligned about the goal. What do we need to achieve in our commercial initiatives? So an example, if we're going back on this sales play that we talked about, it could be that we're looking to have some training, and here we could look at, for example, what's the level of participation, the 20%, 50%, 80%, how many participants were there in the training, and also to look about the satisfaction, mostly because we know that if it's an engaging course, if it's something where you actually, it seems relevant to you and it enables you to actually do something, it just have a better likelihood of sticking in the long run. Then we also want to make sure, how did we build the knowledge that we set out to do, and can we actually impact the behavior change? And looking at, for example, the sales place, one of the things we could look at would be test scores. So how do you actually perform? Do you know the value propositions? Do you understand the process? Do you actually know where to find the tools that should support you in your sales play? And then to these more verifiable outcomes, can we see that outreaches are increasing in the attachment of collateral? Do we see that we have an increase in meeting conversion or outreach to meeting conversion? Do we see that we have these more follow-ups? So then we see that the behavior that we are intending to do is actually also done. Then for this case, we are focusing on the sales cycle and win rates. So from our CRM system, can we actually see that this is then resulting in something, or are we doing all the right things but not having the right outcome? And in the end, if sales cycles are long, after 3, 6, 12 months, are we able to see that we actually delivered the revenue increase that we wanted through the initiative and for the individual rep? The important thing here, I think, is the impact flow when we're talking about when are we able to say something. If the logical link, or assuming the logical link is true, that from our A, B, C, D here, we should be able to already, with the number of participants, if that's low and if the relevance evaluation is low, then we should also expect that we cannot really have the desired end result. So having these flows, we can get it immediately here. We can look at the knowledge and behavior. Do we see leading indicators being evaluated? If that is super high, then we can hopefully also have a high or estimated high impact on the goal. Also, if we see that the outcome is high, then we would of course also assume a high impact in the long term. So balancing this and making sure that we're using these as leading indicators can inform two things: A, the flow, and also B, if we have failed to build a solid logical structure. Let's say, for example, that we have an instance where we are working. Just a second, I need to erase some ink here. But let's say that we think we're doing all of the right things. That we have a very good training. We're training in all of the right things. So we have a more or less 100% completion. Everybody participates. It's super relevant, and everybody is happy with the training. But then we see that the knowledge, the test scores perform horribly, and then we have some wrong outreach that is not really to target. We're delivering less than 20% of what we expected to do. In that transition, there's the logical link to say, okay, there's something gone wrong in that transition. We didn't really build the knowledge through the training. It was nice and people liked it, but we didn't actually equip them to do it. So apart from being a flow function where we can estimate the long-term impact, we can also isolate where in the process, through the actions to the results, have we failed in our logical structure, or where do we need to look in and optimize? And that's a super important aspect of impact measurement, and also the continuous update of what we're doing. This example is maybe relevant to some and not to others, but I think an overarching issue in creating these impact maps or measurement of initiatives is that we try to solve everything in one go. And I think even though that we have pretty good data across everything and we need to involve different sources, one of the issues is that if we are increasing the number of variables and increasing the number of measurement points to a degree where it becomes very, very hard to isolate, then we probably have built a too complex program. In order for this to make logical sense, we need to make sure that we can limit the impact or limit the scope and limit the logical structure, so we can actually have something that is fairly simple. I think my advice, at least, if we end up with having too many variables and too many outputs that we need that we want to measure on and that we can agree upon, then we should maybe consider slicing up the program, having two different impact measurements and measuring on different points, instead of trying to solve everything in one go. because it ends up being super complex and not that easy to apply, not that easy to follow, and in general, not really something that is usable in a practical sense. Talking a bit more about the practical aspects of measurement, it's nice. We can all agree that, okay, we have some data points and so on, but we come to at least in my experience, a very, very important discussion. How do we actually implement the measurement, and how do we actually work with these measurements, and how can we trust the data? An important part that we also mentioned just in the beginning is these external factors that are influencing the business outcomes or the impact. So with all of these external factors and variables and so on, how do we actually ensure that we are looking at the right impact? How can we separate correlation from causality in the way we are actually conducting these impact measures? And I think it's super difficult. And in general, there is sort of this weird dichotomy between what we actually want to do and our willingness to do it, because it is difficult. Causality is a super difficult thing to achieve in your commercial development initiatives. So if we really want to do it, it demands some resources, and we're working with kind of a framework or a maturity ladder of how you're measuring impact that I want to talk about. So we can have different levels of confidence in our impact measurement, but they are not really equal in our approach to how we're doing it. At the very bottom of this, it's basically theory of change. So that is where we are settling for in this impact pyramid. Okay, we're good with the beliefs. That's what we can live with, and not many commercial leaders can survive on that one. We can also do to just key performance measures. So, okay, did we do X? Do we have some of these, as I call it, the knowledge or behavior, or even the outcome level? Is that where we want to do our analysis? Then if we come a bit more mature about the data capacity, looking at different sources, looking at different ways to identify the impact, we can talk a bit about correlation. So how did this correlate with revenue impact? Can we see that we increased A and that resulted in increasing B? And this is kind of the level where we see most companies operate in. That is the extent of impact measurement. If we want to get on the other side of that, if we want to improve and have more confidence in our data and more confidence in the impact, we kind of need to move to the next levels. So we need to upgrade our ability. And one of the things that I advocate heavily is that we need to adapt some of the practices of academia, not all of them, but some of them, about this experimentation and testing of our hypothesis. And there are two kind of ways to do it. One would be to do quasi-experimentation, so comparing to other non-impacted groups. If we're doing a sales training and building up all of that, should we maybe then compare to how did the sales perform price corrected last year? Or can we look at the sales performance in another geography that could be sort of similar, to say, we can't really document causality here, but we can look at some comparables. What is the effect compared to another peer group or back in history? And then if we want to go full academia, we should go to randomized control trials. So having in the training and in the impact, some that gets the training and some that don't. Some that does get change behavior and some that don't, and then compare the two. Without going full academia on it, we need to assume some homogeneity in your control group and your intervention group and all of that. But basically getting to the point where we're comparing apples to oranges there and seeing the impact is the highest level of maturity you can get to. But it's not really always what we want, and it's also costly. I think it's an important reflection that we need to do when we are having this, is to say, what is the level that we want to do? How academically correct that we need to be in our impact measurements? Mostly because there is this weird difference between what we say we want to do and what we actually want we do. So yeah, I want to know exactly the ROI. That's great, but then you end up with a measurement effort that is super high. So at what level can it suffice? And that's a super important discussion to have between the relevant stakeholders in the commercial room. To at what level do we believe that we are comfortable in agreeing that we then believe the results? We do agree that this is the right thing, or do we need to go into full documentation mode? And not all initiatives are the same, and not all approaches should be catered to with the same level of detail in the impact analysis and in the quantification and in the measurability of our initiatives. And that's a key discussion to have with a lot of peer groups. Just an example, we're working with a company on a product launch program where we kind of got the pressure, or the responsible product manager had the pressure to say, okay, we need to figure out what's the ROI, what's the impact of what we're doing. And they kind of went to us and said, oh, we need to make sure we have some impact measurement, and how do we do it? And then we presented them with more or less these 3 scenarios based on this overview. So one, going super scientific to it, the whole control and test group, and that we're having advanced measurements, so doing scenario-based testing. We deployed over a lot of systems. We correlated the learning management system with the CRM system, with an ERP system. We could get the final measures over a period of a year. So golden standard, super fact-based and high confidence, but also it would be delaying the rollout. If you're looking at a sales force or a frontline staff, you can't really have everybody getting the same information at all times in order to get to that scientific level. Then the other aspect was that we can also just be having a super simple, pragmatic solution. So just basing ourselves on the logical links and self-reported data. No control groups, and so on, super measurable, super simple measurements. And for us, it's like it can be good enough. We don't really need to do a lot. We can rely primarily on this direct reports from an LMS system. We don't need to do a lot of data analysis and cleaning. We don't need to set up different treatments, and we can have all work equally. But the downside is we don't really have the causal relationship. We don't really have we rely on self-reported data, which is kind of biased. And what we typically see then is somewhere in the middle is where we can agree that we can look at this. So this quasi-experimentation, just getting to the level of comparing to other historical performance or other frontline staff. That is typically where we can strike a balance between being overly scientific and being too pragmatic. And that, at least for the last couple of years, has been where we often end up with the impact measurements of our commercial initiatives. In many cases, just getting to that level, kind of moving from the where we see most maturity and one step off, it's a huge change, and it also gives a huge difference in terms of the confidence and the impact that we're delivering, and to have better conversations in commercial management. So many ways to roam, many ways we can build up this measurement approach. But what I think is important, where I'm going to spend the last couple of minutes of this webinar, is the practical aspects of how do we get started from this, where I am today, how should I view this impact and this measurability as a tool for me or as an asset. And I think one of the most important things is that we need to kind of shift our mindset in terms of impact. So commercial development and commercial acceleration should be seen currently, at least, as a portfolio. Back to the initial slide where we saw that the amount of initiatives are increasing and we have more investments. It's seldom that we do one thing or have one initiative. We're doing a lot of things or a portfolio of things of this at the same time. And one of the mind shifts we need to do is that we become overly committed to one thing succeeding. So currently, one of the biases we have is that we are focusing on one initiative, and that needs to work. Everything needs to be succeeded. So we're already predetermined that it needs to be a success, and it don't. as a function that is accelerating from utilizing best practices and knowledge sharing and supporting in processes, we're doing so many things that we need to view it more as a portfolio and start to de-bias our approach to measurement. So looking at all of the initiatives, just like a portfolio manager that has a fund in PE with many companies, some will grow, some will have impact, and some won't. And the most important thing of this impact measurement is not just substantiating an ROI calculation and looking at the impact versus cost, but also as a learning principle to get better. So I think that's at least the frame that I would like to instill in this conversation. We have a couple of steps that we try to introduce, and that is to many commercial organizations. They have sort of a project charter or a business case or something that they want to work with when they're setting up commercial initiatives. And I think it's important to bake impact in already at this point, to have that conversation of breaking down the initiative and making the logical links. So instead of having just a statement saying, okay, we want to increase or decrease our sales cycle by 10%, we need to say, okay, so how do we deliver this? Breaking it down in the how and the why. To understand what is the knowledge that needs to be built, or the behavior that needs to change, is there capabilities that we need to develop, and how do we actually instill this? So baking this impact map in already at the beginning when we start to identify and scope, and facilitating those discussions are super important. And then from there, I think it's about starting to define the logic. So making sure that we understand the goal, understand also the solution space. We also need to link that into what do we need? How do we realize this? What is the outcomes and the leading indicators? Down to the people part of it. Who needs to do something different? And what do they need to do different in order for this to succeed? And how do we enable them to do that? And by defining that, back to the improvement part of it, we actually get a chance for each of these elements to, if we start to document our expectations and then our results, to optimize our flow currently, to say what is right for us in terms of training, how do we best impact knowledge, and how do we best deliver outcomes, because there is not a one size fits all into this. Every organization is different. Some can suffice with doing training digitally, some needs in-person training, some needs pragmatism, and it's really, really dependent on what is the change initiative that you want to achieve, how complex that this needs to be. When you've built the logic, I think it's important that we identify what are the right measures, what are the right KPIs, and how do we want to measure. And for each of these, I think it's important that they're both relevant, reliable, and realistic. So relevant, do we see that there is a strong connection to what we actually want to achieve? Is it reliable? Is self-reported data the right thing? Do we need more hard data in order to support this? Where do we find the data? And then also making sure that we have the realism to actually achieve this. So is it scattered in 5 different CRM systems? So do we have the resources needed to do it? So the best impact case can have the worst kind of outcome if we're not able to get the data. So it needs to be within our realm of getting it. And then I think the next part is that once we agree upon this in the stakeholder group, once we've built the logic and say, okay, with this impact case, if we succeed here, can we all agree that this is then the resulting revenue? Then we need to actually start to evaluate it. And that I think is important, because there is a timing aspect in how do we do it. In most cases, especially on the knowledge and so on, it's a pretty good idea to have sort of a baseline assessment. So we want to do this, achieve a shorter sales cycle, and we believe that we require this knowledge in order to generate that behavior. Let's start by testing the knowledge level, because if there's not a delta, if what we want to measure is already at peak performance, then it's probably not the right thing. So start by actually testing up the impact case by looking at what is the baseline, where are we today. Next part is then, once we've established that we have a pretty good assessment and a pretty good baseline, then right after the change activity, we should measure that. So that is already, once we've developed, let's say, a training program, right after that is initiated, we can start to measure. What's important here, again, is this knowledge retention. What we typically advise to do is look at both the direct post-training measurement, but also in a month or 2 or 3 months to have a reiterating test to see what's the decline, what's the knowledge loss. That also kind of gives us a way of evaluating what's the optimal training structure or change structure in order to ensure that we're sustaining a gained knowledge. And it doesn't have to be super complex. Most often it's about repeating the same measurement process just a couple of months later. Then instead of this right after, behavior needs change needs some time to create an impact. So making sure that we're looking at the observed behaviors and leading indicators should happen sometime afterwards. And depending again on the complexity, we're looking at a couple of months. So at the same time where we are reevaluating the longevity of the knowledge accumulation, we should look at the behaviors and outcomes. And then lastly, measuring the long-term impact. Most of the time, we need to evaluate that over the course of a longer period of time, so at least a quarter, 6 months, and so on, so we can see the resulting behavior and leading indicators generating the outcome. Then it's about saying, okay, evaluating that. And the next part is then making sure that we are understanding that impact flow, that we look at the insights about our expectations versus reality in how we perform in each of these measures. And apart from just documenting an ROI or being able to communicate an effectiveness of our initiatives, the goal, at least for me, is about how do we optimize, how do we work with this on a continuous basis. So we take our portfolio of initiatives, take what is best and instill that in our next initiative. So we have a good way of continuously improving our performance based on a structured way of working. This was, for me at least, the introduction to how to work with measurability and impact of commercial initiatives. And we can go much more in depth and be much nerdier, but this morning I only had an hour to talk with you about this. But what I was wondering is also if you guys have any questions, if there's something I need to elaborate a bit on before I leave you guys today. So time for some questions and answers. So I get a question that is about how do you go about measuring more qualitative goals instead of quantitative goals like increased revenue? I assume that this is on the top level, so the goals. So qualitative measures could be if we are looking at, let's say, customer satisfaction, that is a more qualitative measure. That being the goal, I would apply the exact same logic. So what is our hypothesis about the goal, customer satisfaction? If that is the end result, breaking that down into say, okay, what's the challenge? What is the deliverable? What is the leading indicators of customer satisfaction? That could be that we need to have, is it the quality of our calls with our customers? Is it the speed of service? Is it reaction time? And having those hypotheses and building that back into the logic of the behavior we need to change. So that could be, we need to be able to respond sub 10 minutes or sub hour to a response if that is what we believe the link is. And then go back to how do we enable that? So that could be a prioritization engine or a ticket task log that we're implementing, and we need some people to be trained in it. So building the logic would be the exact same thing for me. And then focusing on, again, hard measures as we need to adopt in this case of customer satisfaction. What is the reality of our belief? We believe that customer satisfaction is important. And again, I would link that to an even harder measure that is important to increase customer loyalty, customer lifetime value, all of that. So same structure, and then building the link in the same way. I think we can take a couple of more questions. I hope at least that it answered your question. So I have another one. Hello there, it's interesting, but it also seems like a lot of work. How do you ensure that the impact of your impact measurement? Yes, it is. It's definitely also a valid point that for many organizations, getting to this level and working with impact measurement and in a structured manner is something that they don't do today. I think an important statistic to refer to here is that the companies that takes measurement and improvement seriously over time significantly outperforms the one that don't, that just focuses on reaction measures. So you could make an impact case for the impact measurement, but just looking at straight data and comparables, if you have impact in baked into your processes and evaluating and optimizing, I think it's 20%. I can share the McKinsey study, but it's a higher performance ratio that you get, and you outperform your peers if you are continuously working with impact measurement. Hope that answered. I think we can take one more question, and then I will leave it for today. So again, a question. So impact measurement, this is not something we're doing today. Who in the organization should own measurement? Also a good question. There's different ways to go about it, and when we talk to organizations, different approaches. So my personal belief is that within the impacted people, it should be a shared view. We all have an incentive to deliver impact of what we're doing. I mean, it bears an alternative cost. If we take sellers for training, if we implement a new process, we could have done something else. So both the frontline responsible, the individual salespeople, and in commercial excellence or project organizations should commonly own it. In practice, it can be very difficult to ask frontline managers to own an impact case and be dual responsible for it. So what we see as a more common trait in commercial excellence organizations is that they kind of own the impact and the reporting. So supporting with the right people and the right expertise to actually structure these cases, to actually develop the impact maps and doing the evaluation, so it doesn't interfere too much with the day-to-day work of the front line. So kind of nested in the commercial excellence and impact organization on the side. Great. I think I don't have time for any more. So I want to thank you guys for participating today. It's been a pleasure. And if you have any questions regarding impact measurement or impact tracking, I will be more than happy to get in touch with you and have a dialogue, as it's a fantastically nerdy subject that I love to deep dive into. Thank you for participating, and have a nice rest of your day.